The blood-red sunset painted Thaddeus Sommers' weathered face as he stood on the porch of his ramshackle ranch house, 6 pairs of young eyes watching him through the dust-streaked windows. The year was 1887, and Alamosa, Colorado had given him nothing but hardship since his wife's passing 3 months prior. "Pa, Susie won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do." 10-year-old Mary, the oldest of his brood, appeared at the doorway, her apron smudged with the remnants of their meager supper. Thaddeus sighed, pushing his hat back on his sweat-drenched hair. At 36, he'd aged a decade in the month since typhoid had claimed Elizabeth. 6 children, Mary, 8-year-old twins James and Joseph, 5-year-old Samuel, 3-year-old Susie, and baby Grace, just 7 months old, and a ranch that was falling to pieces around him. "Coming, Mary," he muttered, casting one last glance at the horizon. The cattle needed tending, the fence on the north pasture was broken, and now the baby wouldn't stop crying. He'd been a fool to think he could manage alone. As he stepped inside the cluttered main room, the wailing grew louder. Mary had Susie propped on one hip while trying to stir something in a pot that looked suspiciously like the same beans they'd had for 4 days straight. "She's got fever again, Pa," Mary said, her small face pinched with worry beyond her years. Thaddeus took the screaming toddler, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "James, fetch some water from the well," he ordered, his voice gruff with exhaustion. "Joseph, check on the baby. Is she still sleeping?" The twins scrambled to obey, their small boots thundering across the wooden floor. Samuel sat quietly in the corner, whittling a stick with a dull knife, a habit Thaddeus knew he should discourage but hadn't the energy to fight. Outside, a wagon's wheels creaked to a halt. Thaddeus frowned. He wasn't expecting company, and strangers seldom brought good news in these parts. "Mary, take your sister," he said, passing the still crying Susie back to his daughter. He reached for the rifle propped by the door, a reflex born of years on the frontier. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. Thaddeus cracked the door open, rifle barrel visible but not pointed. "Mr. Sommers?" A young woman stood on his porch, her traveling dress dusty from the road, a small valise clutched in her gloved hand. Her golden brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a practical bonnet, and her hazel eyes met his with a directness that took him by surprise. "Who's asking?" he replied warily. "Hannah O'Brien, sir. I've come from Denver. I believe you advertised for help." Her voice carried a slight eastern lilt, but there was steel beneath the gentility. Thaddeus blinked. The advertisement. 3 weeks ago, in desperate straits, he'd placed an advertisement in the Denver newspaper for a housekeeper or nanny. He'd nearly forgotten, having received no responses. "You're the respondent to my advertisement?" he asked, lowering his rifle slightly. "Yes, sir. I arrived in Alamosa yesterday and inquired at the general store about your location." She glanced past him, taking in the chaos visible through the doorway. "I see the advertisement wasn't exaggerating about the situation." Behind him, Susie's wailing reached a crescendo and the smell of burning beans filled the air. "Pa, the pot's boiling over," Mary cried. Hannah O'Brien's eyebrows rose slightly. "May I come in, Mr. Sommers?" "It appears you could use an extra pair of hands immediately." Thaddeus hesitated. She looked respectable enough, but appearances could be deceiving, still, with Susie feverish and the rest of the children running wild. "I can't offer much in the way of payment," he said bluntly. "Room and board and $5 a month is all I can manage," she nodded, unperturbed. "That's acceptable for now. Shall I help with supper or with the sick child first?" Without waiting for an answer, she stepped past him into the house, set down her valise, and removed her bonnet and gloves. In one fluid motion, she moved to the stove, lifting the pot of scorched beans off the heat. "Mary, is it?" she said to his eldest. "Would you introduce me to your siblings while your father and I see to your sister?" Mary stared, open-mouthed, then nodded. "Yes, madam." Hannah approached Thaddeus and held out her arms. "May I?" she asked, indicating Susie. Reluctantly, he transferred his sobbing daughter to this stranger's arms. To his astonishment, Hannah immediately began humming a soft tune, her hand gently feeling Susie's forehead. "She's quite warm." "Do you have any willow bark tea, or perhaps witch hazel?" Her eyes scanned the kitchen shelves. No, Elizabeth kept such things, but I don't know." He trailed off, feeling the familiar wave of helplessness that had become his constant companion. Hannah nodded as if his ineptitude was expected. "I brought some medicinals in my case. Mary, could you fetch my valise, please?" To Susie, she murmured, "There now, little one, we'll have you feeling better soon." The child's wails had already diminished to whimpers under Hannah's gentle touch. Over the next hour, Thaddeus watched in stunned silence as Hannah O'Brien transformed his household. She prepared a willow bark tea for Susie, salvaged what she could of supper, added cornbread she somehow conjured from his near-empty pantry, bathed the baby, and organized the older children into a reasonably efficient cleanup crew. By the time darkness had fully descended, all 6 children were fed, washed, and tucked into their beds. The kitchen was clean, tomorrow's breakfast partially prepared, and Hannah O'Brien sat across from him at the scrubbed kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "Mr. Sommers," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I feel I should be clear about my situation. I'm 24 years old, unmarried, and have experience as a governess in Boston. I came west for personal reasons that need not concern you, but I assure you my references are impeccable. I can provide them if you wish." Thaddeus studied her in the lamplight. She was pretty in a sensible way, with capable hands and clear eyes that held no artifice. Not a conventional beauty like Elizabeth had been, but there was something compelling about her directness. "Miss O'Brien, after what I've witnessed tonight, I'd hire you if your only reference was from the devil himself," he said frankly. "But I should warn you, this isn't a temporary situation. The children they need more than I can give them." Something softened in her expression. "Children always do, Mr. Sommers. That's why it takes a community to raise them properly." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll stay here if you'll let me stay, at least until you find someone more suitable." "I doubt there is anyone more suitable," he admitted, too tired to be anything but honest. "But you should know what you're getting into. The ranch is struggling. I'm behind on everything since Elizabeth," he stopped, the familiar tightness gripping his throat. "Since you lost your wife," she finished gently. "I understand, Mr. Sommers. I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult circumstances." "Thaddeus," he said suddenly, "if you're staying in my home and caring for my children, you might as well use my given name." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Very well, Thaddeus, and you may call me Hannah." She rose, gathering their empty cups. "Now, if you'll direct me to where I'll be sleeping, I should like to retire. Tomorrow will be a busy day." He showed her to Elizabeth's sewing room, the only available space that offered any privacy. It was small, with just enough room for a narrow bed and a chest of drawers, but Hannah merely nodded in approval. "This will do nicely," she said. "Good night, Thaddeus." "Good night, Miss O'Brien Hannah," he corrected himself, feeling oddly formal and awkward. "And thank you," she smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her practical features into something almost beautiful. "You're welcome." As he made his way to his own lonely bed, Thaddeus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a small flicker of hope. Hannah rose before dawn, her body still adjusting to the different rhythm of ranch life. In the dim light, she quickly dressed in her plainest work dress and pinned her hair into a practical bun. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a governess in a wealthy Boston household, secure but unfulfilled. Now she was in Colorado territory, about to care for 6 motherless children and a household that appeared to be hanging by a thread. She had her reasons for fleeing east, reasons she kept close to her heart. Thomas Blackwood's unwanted attentions and the scandal that followed when she rebuffed him had made her position untenable. When she'd seen the advertisement seeking help for a widowed rancher with 6 children, it had seemed like providence. The kitchen was cold when she entered. Hannah quickly built up the fire in the cookstove and set water to boil for coffee. By the time she heard stirring from the other rooms, she had biscuits baking, oatmeal simmering, and bacon frying. Thaddeus appeared first, his face registering surprise at finding breakfast nearly ready. "You're up early," he said, reaching automatically for the coffee pot. "I thought it best to get a head start," she replied, pouring him a cup. The little one, Susie, was feverish in the night, but she's cooler this morning. I checked on all the children before coming down." He nodded, sipping the coffee with appreciation. "This is good, better than the tar I usually make. The secret is eggshells," she said, turning back to the stove. "They clarify the brew." A small parade of children began trickling into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Mary, already dressed and attempting to manage baby Grace, led the procession. "Good morning," Hannah greeted them cheerfully. "Who's hungry for breakfast?" The twins, James and Joseph, identical with their father's dark hair and serious eyes, eyed her suspiciously. Samuel, the 5-year-old, clutched a wooden horse and watched her with undisguised curiosity. "Who are you again?" James, or was it Joseph, asked bluntly. "This is Miss O'Brien," Thaddeus said, his voice carrying a warning tone. "She's going to be helping us around the ranch. You'll mind her as you would me or your mother." A momentary silence fell at the mention of their mother. Hannah gently broke it by placing a bowl of oatmeal sweetened with the last of the house's molasses in front of Samuel. "I'm Hannah," she said warmly, "and I hope we'll all become good friends." Mary approached, bouncing Grace on her hip. "She's been fussy, Miss O'Brien. I think she's hungry." Hannah took the baby, expertly settling her in the crook of her arm. "Of course she is. Let me see what we can do about that while you eat your own breakfast, Mary. You've been taking care of everyone long enough." The girl's shoulders slumped with relief, and she slid onto the bench beside her brothers. "What's for breakfast?" Joseph asked, peering at the stove. "Oatmeal, biscuits, and bacon," Hannah answered, checking Grace's diaper. "Though I notice we're running low on supplies. Is there a list for the mercantile in town?" Thaddeus looked momentarily baffled. "A list? I usually just pick up whatever we need when I remember." Hannah bit back a sigh. No wonder the pantry was so disorganized. "I'll make one after breakfast, if that's acceptable. Is there a market day when you usually go to town?" "Saturdays, mostly," he replied, watching as she competently prepared a bottle for Grace from the morning's fresh milk. "But I need to mend the fence in the north pasture today and check on the new calves." "I can go," Mary offered, her mouth full of biscuit. "I know the way." "Absolutely not," Thaddeus and Hannah said in unison. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something passed between them, mutual understanding, perhaps. "I'll take the wagon into town," Thaddeus conceded. "After I check on the calves. The fence can wait another day," Hannah nodded. "Perfect. I'll have a comprehensive list ready by then. In the meantime, perhaps you could show me around the property after breakfast. I should know where everything is if I'm to be of any real help." He agreed, and the meal continued with the controlled chaos that seemed to be the hallmark of meals with 6 children. Hannah observed them carefully, noting the dynamics. Mary, trying so hard to be a little mother, the twins, competitive but fiercely loyal to each other, Samuel, quiet and imaginative, Susie, still feverish but brightening under attention, and baby Grace, healthy but clearly missing maternal care. After breakfast, while the older children tackled the dishes under her supervision, Hannah changed and dressed both Susie and Grace. She found the baby's clothing supply woefully inadequate and made a mental note to add fabric to her mercantile list. Ready for that tour. Thaddeus asked when she emerged onto the porch, Susie's hand in hers and Grace balanced on her hip. "Yes, though I may need to put Susie down for a rest soon. She's still recovering." Hannah smiled down at the little girl whose thumb was firmly in her mouth. "Perhaps we could bring Mary along to help with the children. I'd like to get to know all of them better." Thaddeus hesitated, then nodded. "Mary," he called, "come show Miss O'Brien around the property." The girl appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, Pa. You know this place as well as I do. Show Miss O'Brien the outbuildings and the garden plot while I check the herd. The twins can finish the dishes." Mary's face lit up at being entrusted with this responsibility. "Yes, sir. Come on, Miss O'Brien. I'll show you everything." For the next hour, Hannah listened as Mary proudly pointed out the barn, the chicken coop. "The fox got 3 hens last month, but the rest are good layers." The vegetable garden, sadly overgrown with weeds. The springhouse, and the small family cemetery where Elizabeth Sommers lay beneath a simple wooden cross. Mary fell silent at the gravesite. Hannah shifted Grace to her other hip and took Mary's hand. Your mother must have been a wonderful woman, she said softly. Mary nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She was the best. She could make anything grow, and she sang all the time, and she never got mad even when we were awful. A tear slipped down her cheek. Pa doesn't sing anymore. He doesn't do anything except work and look sad. Hannah squeezed the girl's hand. Grief takes time, Mary. Your father loves you all very much. I know, Mary whispered. But sometimes I think he wishes he could go away too. The girl's words pierced Hannah's heart. Oh, Mary, I'm sure that's not true. Your father is trying his best in a very difficult situation. Will you help him? Will you stay? Mary looked up at her with desperate hope. Susie already likes you, and you make good biscuits, and Pa almost smiled at breakfast. Hannah felt the weight of the child's expectations. I'll stay as long as I'm needed, she promised, choosing her words carefully. Now, shall we head back? I think Susie needs her nap, and I'd like to tackle that garden before dinner. Back at the house, Hannah settled Susie for her nap and placed Grace in a makeshift pen where Samuel could entertain her with his wooden toys. With Mary's help, she began the enormous task of taking inventory of the household supplies. By midday, she had a comprehensive list for the mercantile and had discovered at least a dozen urgent needs around the house: leaking roof, broken window pane, depleted woodpile, and a disturbing lack of winter preparations, despite the fact that October was waning. When Thaddeus returned from checking the herd, she was kneeling in the garden, energetically pulling weeds while Mary worked alongside her. What are you doing? He asked, frowning at the sight of her dirt-stained hands and flushed face. Hannah sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. Salvaging what can be saved of your garden before frost hits. There are still carrots, turnips, and potatoes to be harvested if we act quickly. She gestured to the pile of uprooted weeds. Mary has been a tremendous help. Mary beamed at the praise. Thaddeus looked uncomfortable. That's not. You weren't hired for field work, Miss O'Brien. Hannah, she reminded him, and I was hired to help, was I not? Food from the garden means less to purchase at the mercantile. She rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. Speaking of which, I've prepared a list. Would you like to review it before you go to town? He followed her into the house, where she presented him with a neatly written list of necessities. Thaddeus' eyes widened as he scanned it. This is comprehensive, he managed. I've marked the most urgent items with an asterisk, she explained. The rest can wait if funds are tight. He rubbed the back of his neck. Funds are always tight, but we need most of these things. I just never seem to remember them all. That's why lists exist, she said practically. Now, if you're heading to town, perhaps you could take the twins. They seem restless, and the change of scenery might do them good. Take the twins to town. He looked startled by the suggestion. Yes, they're 8, aren't they? Old enough to help carry packages and learn how business is conducted. Besides, it would give them some time alone with you. Her voice softened. Children need that, you know, individual attention from their father. Thaddeus stared at her as if she'd suggested something revolutionary. Perhaps in his world of survival and grief it was. I suppose they could come, he said slowly. James has been asking to see the blacksmith shop. Excellent, Hannah smiled. Off you go then. Supper will be ready when you return. As she watched him gather the twins and the wagon, Hannah felt a flicker of satisfaction. One small step toward healing this fractured family. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Hannah and Mary harvested vegetables until their backs ached, then moved inside to prepare supper. Samuel proved surprisingly helpful, fetching and carrying with solemn dedication to his tasks. Susie woke from her nap much improved, her fever having broken, and even baby Grace seemed more content after a thorough bathing and fresh clothes. By the time the wagon rumbled back into the yard, Hannah had a hearty stew simmering, fresh bread cooling, and had managed to wash and mend 3 sets of children's clothing. The twins burst through the door, eyes shining with excitement from their adventure in town. Behind them came Thaddeus, arms laden with packages. Miss O'Brien, James exclaimed. Pa let us help pick out new boots for Samuel, and we saw a real gunfight. Hannah's eyes flew to Thaddeus in alarm. Not a real gunfight, he clarified quickly. 2 drunks arguing outside the saloon. The marshal intervened before anything happened. He set the packages on the table. But they did help with the shopping, and Joseph remembered the salt when I forgot it. Joseph puffed up with pride. I remembered because it was on Miss O'Brien's list with the stars next to it. Hannah smiled. Well done, Joseph, and it's Hannah, remember, Miss O'Brien sounds so formal for someone who lives in the same house. Hannah, the boy repeated, testing it out. Pa says we got almost everything on your list, and he even ordered glass for the broken window. Did he now? Hannah cast an approving glance at Thaddeus. That's excellent news. As they unpacked the supplies, she noticed several items she hadn't requested: a bolt of bright blue calico fabric, a small jar of honey, a paper of hairpins, and a modest brooch. What are these? She asked, holding up the unexpected purchases. Thaddeus looked almost embarrassed. The fabric is for the girls. The mercantile owner's wife suggested it would make nice winter dresses. The honey is because Mary mentioned you like it in your tea, and the other things. He trailed off, seemingly at a loss. The pins and brooch are for you, Joseph supplied helpfully. Pa said a lady ought to have pretty things, even on a ranch. Hannah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. That's very thoughtful, but unnecessary. My wages aren't meant for they're not from your wages, Thaddeus interrupted. Consider them a thank you for taking us on. God knows we're a handful. His eyes met hers briefly before darting away. Besides, your clothes will need mending too if you keep wrestling with that garden. She couldn't help but smile at that. Fair point. Thank you, Thaddeus, they're lovely gifts. Something in his expression softened, and for just a moment, Hannah could see the man he must have been before grief had carved such deep lines into his face. That evening, after the children were in bed, Hannah and Thaddeus sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea. She'd added a spoonful of the honey to hers, a small luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. The children seem happier already, Thaddeus observed, watching her over the rim of his cup. Hannah nodded. They're resilient, children often are, but they need stability and attention as much as they need food and shelter. Things I've been short on providing, he acknowledged grimly. You've been doing the best you can, she countered. But no one person can be everything to 6 children while running a ranch. It's simply not possible. He studied his hands, work roughened and strong. Elizabeth made it look easy. She'd have all this, he gestured around the now tidy kitchen, and still find time to read to the little ones and help Mary with her letters. She had years to perfect her system, Hannah pointed out gently. And I imagine she didn't lose her partner unexpectedly. Thaddeus looked up sharply. No, she didn't. After a pause, he asked, What about you, Hannah? What brings a Boston governess all the way to Colorado territory? Hannah sipped her tea, considering how much to reveal. A desire for change, for meaningful work. That's not the whole story, he said shrewdly. No one travels halfway across the country just for meaningful work unless they're running from something. She set her cup down carefully. Perhaps, but we all have our secrets, don't we, Thaddeus? A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken stories. Finally, he nodded. Fair enough, we'll leave the past where it belongs, shall we? What matters is that you're here now and my children are better for it. He stood, stretching his tall frame. I should check the stock before turning in. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Thaddeus, she replied softly, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. Alone in the quiet kitchen, Hannah allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been denying all day. She was already growing attached to this broken family. And that was dangerous indeed. The weeks passed swiftly as October gave way to November. Hannah fell into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. The early mornings, the constant demands of 6 children, the never-ending household tasks, all of it exhausted her, but in a way that felt purposeful and right. Thaddeus, too, seemed to be finding his footing again. With Hannah managing the household and the younger children, he was able to focus on the ranch work that had fallen behind. The north pasture fence was finally mended, the barn roof patched before the first snowfall, and he'd even arranged to sell 3 steers at a decent price to a buyer from Denver. The children blossomed under Hannah's care. Mary, relieved of excessive responsibility, had time to be a child again. The twins channeled their energy into helping their father with age-appropriate ranch chores. Samuel's reading improved with daily lessons at the kitchen table. Susie recovered fully from her illness and became Hannah's eager shadow, and baby Grace began taking her first tentative steps, lurching from chair to table while everyone cheered. As for Hannah herself, she found an unexpected contentment in this simple life. Her days in Boston, with its rigid social hierarchies and false niceties, seemed increasingly like a distant dream. Here, despite the hardships, there was an honesty to existence that appealed to her practical nature. And then there was Thaddeus himself. She couldn't pinpoint when her feelings for him had begun to shift, but shift they had. Perhaps it was the way his face softened when he read to the children in the evenings, or how he always made sure to bring in extra firewood so she wouldn't wake to a cold house. Maybe it was the quiet conversations they shared after the children were asleep, where he spoke of his hopes for the ranch and his fears for his children's futures. Whatever the cause, Hannah found herself watching him more often than was strictly proper, noting the strength in his hands, the way the sun had burnished his skin to bronze, the rare smile that transformed his solemn features. It was foolish, she knew. She was an employee, nothing more. And Thaddeus was still grieving his wife, even if that grief had begun to ease. Besides, she hadn't come west looking for romance, quite the opposite, in fact. Still, on a crisp November afternoon, as Hannah hung laundry in the yard and watched Thaddeus patiently teaching Samuel how to groom his horse, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at the sight. "You're sweet on Pa," a voice said matter-of-factly beside her. Hannah jumped, nearly dropping the wet sheet she was hanging. Mary stood there, her knowing eyes too perceptive for a child of 10. That's not. I'm just doing my job, Mary," Hannah stammered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Mary shook her head. "It's all right. Ma would want him to be happy again." She picked up a clothespin and handed it to Hannah. "And he looks at you too when you're not watching." Hannah's heart fluttered traitorously. "Mary, that's enough of that kind of talk. Your father hired me to care for you children and the house, that's all." The girl shrugged. "If you say so, but I think it would be nice if you stayed forever, as more than just our helper." Before Hannah could formulate a response, Mary skipped away to where Susie was playing with her rag doll under a tree. Forever. The word echoed in Hannah's mind. She'd been at the Sommers ranch for just over a month, yet already she couldn't imagine leaving. The children had worked their way into her heart with their resilience and need. And Thaddeus? No, she wouldn't allow her thoughts to travel that path. She was here to do a job to help a family in need. Nothing more. The next day brought the season's first heavy snowfall. Hannah woke to a transformed world, everything blanketed in pristine white. The children were ecstatic, clamoring to go outside and play after morning chores. "Please, Hannah, please," Susie begged, her nose pressed to the frosted window. "I want to make a snow angel. It's too cold for baby Grace," Hannah said, bouncing the infant on her hip. "And someone needs to help me bake bread today." "I'll stay with the baby," Mary offered. "I'm getting too old for snow games anyway." Hannah gave her a knowing look but accepted the offer. "Very well, but everyone needs proper wraps, scarves, mittens, and hats. No arguments." The twins cheered and ran to find their winter gear, while Samuel solemnly pulled on the new boots that had been purchased in town. Hannah helped Susie bundle up in layers, tying a woolen scarf securely around her small face. "Stay within sight of the house," Hannah instructed. "And come in if you get too cold or wet." Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, stomping snow from his boots. "Morning blizzards passed, but there's another coming this evening," he reported. "I've brought extra wood for the stove." His eyes fell on the excited children, going out to play. "Hannah said we could make snow angels," Susie exclaimed. "Will you come too, Pa?" A shadow crossed his face, as it often did when confronted with direct requests from his children for his time. "I need to check on the cattle, make sure they've got access to feed and water in this weather." Hannah saw the disappointment in Susie's eyes and acted on impulse. "Perhaps your father could join you for just a few minutes before his chores. A quick snowball fight, maybe?" Thaddeus looked startled, then uncertain. "I suppose I could spare a few minutes." The children erupted in cheers, grabbing his hands and pulling him toward the door. Hannah smiled at the sight, then turned to prepare the bread dough with Mary. Through the kitchen window, she watched as the solemn rancher was gradually drawn into his children's play. At first stiff and awkward, he soon found himself the target of the twins' snowballs and responded by helping Susie build a fort for defense. His deep laugh carried through the crisp air as Samuel landed a direct hit on his hat, sending it flying. "He used to laugh all the time," Mary said softly beside her, following Hannah's gaze. "Before Ma got sick." Hannah squeezed the girl's shoulder. "Grief changes people, Mary, but it doesn't last forever. Your father is finding his way back." "Because of you," the girl said with certainty. "You make things better." Hannah turned back to her bread dough, kneading it more vigorously than necessary. "We all help each other, Mary. That's what family—" She stopped herself, horrified by the slip. "That's what households do." Mary gave her a knowing look but said nothing more. An hour later, the children tumbled back inside, red-cheeked and soaking. Hannah organized a rotation of dry clothes and hot chocolate while Thaddeus built up the fire to a roaring blaze. "That was fun, Pa," Joseph said, clutching his steaming mug. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" Thaddeus hesitated, glancing at Hannah. "Perhaps, if the weather permits and chores are done." It was a non-committal answer, but more promising than his typical refusals. Hannah counted it as progress. The promised evening blizzard arrived with brutal force. Wind howled around the eaves of the ranch house, finding every crack and seam in the aging structure. After dinner, Hannah organized the children to push rags into the worst drafts and hung extra blankets over the windows. "Will the animals be all right, Pa?" Samuel asked worriedly as a particularly strong gust rattled the walls. "They're safe in the barn," Thaddeus assured him. "I made sure of it before supper." Hannah frowned, looking out at the worsening conditions. "The temperature is dropping quickly." "Perhaps we should bring in more wood now before it gets worse." Thaddeus nodded. "Good thinking. I'll fetch some from the woodpile." "I'll help," Hannah said, already reaching for her shawl. "It will go faster with two." He looked like he might object, then nodded. "Bundle up." "It's bitter out there." Together they stepped into the howling darkness. The wind cut through Hannah's layers instantly, stealing her breath. Snow flew horizontally, stinging her exposed skin. Thaddeus moved ahead, breaking a path through the already deep drifts. They reached the woodpile, which was thankfully partially covered by an overhang from the barn. "You load your arms, I'll load mine," Thaddeus shouted over the wind. "Then straight back to the house," Hannah nodded, gathering as many logs as she could carry. The wind whipped her skirts around her legs, making movement difficult. As she turned to follow Thaddeus back to the house, a powerful gust caught her, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, logs tumbling from her arms as she fell heavily into the snow. Thaddeus was at her side instantly. "Are you hurt?" "Just my pride," she gasped, trying to regain her footing. The snow had infiltrated her collar and cuffs, the icy shock making her shiver violently. He abandoned his own armload of wood and helped her up, his strong hands gripping her elbows. "Lean on me," he instructed, wrapping one arm around her waist. The contact, even through layers of clothing, sent a different kind of heat through Hannah. She was acutely aware of his strength, his solidity against the chaos of the storm. They struggled back to the house together, abandoning the idea of more firewood for the moment. Inside, the children looked up in alarm as they staggered through the door. "Hannah fell," Thaddeus explained tersely. "Mary, fetch a towel, she's soaked through." Mary hurried to obey while Hannah tried to protest. "I'm fine, truly, just a bit damp." Thaddeus guided her to a chair by the fire. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice gruff with concern. "Get those wet things off before you catch your death." The phrase hung in the air between them, reminding them both of Elizabeth's fate. Hannah saw pain flash across his features before he turned away. "I'll make some tea," he said, moving to the stove. Later, after the children were in bed and Hannah had changed into dry clothes, she sat with Thaddeus at the kitchen table. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside was warm and secure. The tea had become something stronger, a small measure of whiskey that Thaddeus kept for medicinal purposes. "Thank you for your help tonight," he said, his voice low to avoid waking the children. Not just with the wood, but with everything. This place was falling apart before you came. Hannah wrapped her hands around her cup, savoring its warmth. I've done nothing extraordinary. Just what needed doing. No, he shook his head. It's more than that. You've brought life back into this house. The children smile again, they laugh. He stared into his cup. Even I find myself remembering what it was like before. Before you lost Elizabeth, Hannah said softly. He nodded, his face shadowed in the lamplight. I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again, that I'd just go through the motions until the children were grown. His eyes lifted to meet hers. But lately I've felt different, Hannah's heart quickened. Different how? Hopeful, he said simply. Like maybe there's still some good left in this world for me, not just for my children. The air between them seemed to thicken. Hannah was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Thaddeus, she began, not sure what she meant to say. A cry from the children's room broke the moment. Baby Grace, woken by the storm. I'll go, Hannah said, rising quickly, almost grateful for the interruption. Whatever had been building between them was too complex, too fraught with potential for pain. As she soothed the fussing infant back to sleep, Hannah tried to calm her own turbulent thoughts. She was developing feelings for Thaddeus Sommers, feelings that went far beyond her role as his children's caretaker. But acting on those feelings would be foolish. He was still grieving, still tied to the memory of his wife, and she was an employee, dependent on his goodwill for her livelihood. No, she decided, tucking the blanket around Grace's small form. She would continue as she had been, caring for the children, managing the household, being a steady presence in their lives. Nothing more. But as she returned to the kitchen to find Thaddeus waiting for her, his face open and unguarded in a way she'd never seen before, Hannah knew her resolution would be sorely tested in the days to come. As November deepened toward winter, the rhythms of ranch life adjusted to accommodate the changing season. The cattle required more attention in the cold, the children needed extra layers and vigilance against illness, and the household preparations for the coming Christmas season began to occupy Hannah's thoughts. One morning in early December, she was teaching Mary and Samuel their letters while the twins worked on simple arithmetic problems. Susie sat at her feet, stringing dried berries for decoration, and Grace napped in a cradle Hannah had discovered in the attic and restored. Hannah, Mary said, looking up from her slate, will we have Christmas this year? The question brought Hannah up short. Of course we will. Why would you ask such a thing? Mary exchanged glances with the twins. We didn't have one last year. Pa said he couldn't. She trailed off, but Hannah understood. Last year, fresh in their grief with Elizabeth gone just months before, Thaddeus couldn't face the holiday traditions that would only underscore his wife's absence. Well, Hannah said firmly, this year will be different. We'll have decorations and special food and perhaps even a few modest gifts. She hesitated, not wanting to overstep. If your father approves, of course. Approves of what? Thaddeus asked, coming in from outside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. The children looked at Hannah expectantly. Christmas, she said. The children were asking about our plans for the holiday. His face closed slightly, the way it often did when memories of Elizabeth surfaced. I hadn't given it much thought. Hannah rose, gesturing for the children to continue their work. She moved toward Thaddeus, speaking quietly. I understand it might be difficult, but the children need this. They need to know that joy can return even after loss. He studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. Is that possible? Real joy, not just pretending for the children's sake. Yes, she said with conviction. I believe it is, if we allow ourselves to embrace it. A long moment passed between them before he nodded. All right, Christmas it is, but I'm afraid I'm not much help with such things. Hannah smiled, relieved. Leave it to me, and the children, of course, they'll be thrilled to help, and help they did. Over the next weeks, the ranch house gradually transformed. Pine boughs appeared over doorways. Paper chains festooned the main room, and the children's excitement grew with each passing day. Hannah organized secret gift-making sessions while Thaddeus was out with the cattle carved wooden toys from the twins for their younger siblings. a knitted scarf from Mary for her father, simple rag dolls for the girls. Thaddeus himself began disappearing into the barn in the evenings, working on mysterious projects that brought sawdust back on his clothes. 2 weeks before Christmas, Hannah decided it was time to address another holiday tradition. After the younger children were in bed, she called Mary, the twins, and Thaddeus to the kitchen table. "I think we should bake Christmas cookies," she announced. Elizabeth must have had special recipes. The silence that followed made her instantly regret her words. Mary's eyes filled with tears, and the twins looked down at their hands. "I'm sorry," Hannah said quickly. "I shouldn't have." "No," Thaddeus interrupted, his voice rough. "You're right. Elizabeth made the most wonderful gingerbread stars. The children looked forward to them all year." "Ma kept her recipes in a tin box," Mary said softly. "In the top cupboard. Pa put it away after." Thaddeus stood abruptly. "I'll get it." He returned moments later with a battered tin box. Carefully, almost reverently, he placed it on the table. "She'd want you to have these, Hannah. To make them for the children." The simple statement nearly undid her. To be entrusted with this piece of Elizabeth, this connection to the family's happier past, it was a responsibility Hannah didn't take lightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "We'll honor her memory with every batch." And so another tradition was restored. The next day, Hannah and the children spent hours in the kitchen, flour dusting every surface as they worked through Elizabeth's recipes. The familiar scents of ginger and cinnamon seemed to lift everyone's spirits, and even Thaddeus lingered, telling stories of Christmases past that made the children giggle rather than cry. As the day approached, Hannah realized they were missing one crucial element: a Christmas tree. In Boston, trees had been sold on street corners, but here in the wilds of Colorado, they would need to find and cut their own. "We could make an expedition of it," she suggested to Thaddeus one evening after the children were asleep. "Take the wagon up to the foothills, make a day of it." The children would love the adventure. He considered the idea. "There's a stand of pines about an hour's ride from here. If the weather holds, we could go this Saturday." Hannah beamed. "Perfect, I'll prepare a picnic, even though it's cold. Hot cider and sandwiches, and some of those gingerbread cookies we baked." Thaddeus watched her enthusiasm with a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You've brought so much life back into this house," he said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." Hannah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. Seeing the children happy is thanks enough. "And what about you, Hannah?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "Are you happy here on this hardscrabble ranch with a widower and his 6 wild children?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. Was she happy? The work was harder than anything she'd done in Boston, the comforts fewer, the future uncertain, and yet, yes, she answered honestly. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warming. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I'm glad," he said simply. The contact sent a ripple of awareness through Hannah. This man, this complicated, grieving, strong man, was becoming essential to her in ways that went far beyond their working arrangement. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Saturday dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for their Christmas tree expedition. The children were up at first light, too excited to sleep. By mid-morning, they were all bundled into the wagon, hot bricks wrapped in flannel at their feet to ward off the cold, heading toward the foothills. Hannah sat beside Thaddeus on the wagon seat, the children nestled in blankets in the back. The landscape stretched before them, snow-covered and pristine, the mountains rising in the distance against a perfect blue sky. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed, taking in the scenery. "I never imagined Colorado would be so magnificent. It grows on you," Thaddeus agreed. "When I first came west, I thought I'd stay a few years, make my fortune, and return east. But once this land gets into your blood..." He trailed off, gesturing at the vista before them. "You can't leave," Hannah finished for him. "I understand that now." He glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You do," she nodded. "Boston seems like another world now, another life. I can't imagine going back." The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Hannah kept her eyes on the horizon, afraid of what he might read in her face if she turned to him. They reached the pine forest around midday. Thaddeus helped everyone down from the wagon, then fetched the axe he'd brought for cutting their chosen tree. "Remember, not too big," Hannah cautioned as the children scattered, each intent on finding the perfect specimen. "It has to fit in our main room and leave space for us to move around it." "This one, Pa," Samuel called almost immediately, pointing to a tree nearly 12 feet tall. Thaddeus laughed. "I think that's a bit ambitious, son. Keep looking." The search continued with much debate and comparison. Finally, a modest 6-foot pine was selected, one with evenly spaced branches and a pleasing symmetry. Thaddeus made short work of cutting it down, and the twins helped him drag it back to the wagon. "Now for our picnic," Hannah announced, unpacking the basket she'd prepared. She spread a blanket on a relatively dry patch of ground, and they all gathered around to share the simple meal. As they ate, Susie asked, "Hannah, did you have Christmas trees where you came from?" "Yes, but not as beautiful as this one," Hannah answered, smiling at the little girl. "In Boston, we bought our trees from sellers who brought them in from the countryside." "What else did you do for Christmas?" James asked around a mouthful of sandwich. Hannah described the holiday traditions of her childhood carol singing, midnight church services, the elaborate shop window displays downtown. The children listened, rapt, while Thaddeus watched her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "Your family must miss you," he observed when she finished, "especially at this time of year." Hannah's smile faltered slightly. "I have no immediate family left. My parents died several years ago, and I was an only child." She didn't mention her former fiancé, Thomas Blackwood, whose betrayal had been the final push that sent her west. Some secrets were better kept. "So we're your family now," Susie declared with a child's directness, climbing into Hannah's lap. Hannah froze, uncertain how to respond. She looked helplessly at Thaddeus, expecting him to correct his daughter's presumption. Instead, he said quietly, "I think Hannah needs to decide that for herself, Susie, but we're certainly grateful she's with us this Christmas." The simplicity of his statement and the warmth behind it eased Hannah's momentary panic. She hugged Susie closer. "I'm grateful too, little one, more than you know." The journey home was filled with cheerful chatter as the children planned how to decorate their tree. Hannah sat close to Thaddeus on the wagon seat, their shoulders occasionally brushing as the vehicle jolted over the uneven ground. Each contact sent a small thrill through her, a feeling she tried valiantly to ignore. That evening, once the tree was securely mounted in a bucket of sand in the main room, the decorating commenced. Hannah had prepared for this moment, saving scraps of colorful fabric to make simple ornaments, stringing popcorn and cranberries into garlands, and fashioning stars from tin can lids that she'd polished to a shine. "It's the most beautiful tree we've ever had," Mary declared when they finished, standing back to admire their handiwork. "Even prettier than the ones Ma made," Joseph agreed, then looked stricken, as if he'd said something disloyal. Thaddeus put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your mother would love this tree," he said firmly. "And she'd be proud of how you've all helped Hannah make this Christmas special." That night, after the children were asleep, Hannah found Thaddeus still sitting in the main room, gazing at the tree by the light of a single lamp. She hesitated in the doorway, reluctant to intrude on what seemed like a private moment. He sensed her presence and looked up. "Join me," he asked, gesturing to the chair beside his. Hannah moved into the room, settling into the offered seat. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the light play on the simple decorations. "Thank you," Thaddeus said eventually, "for giving this back to my children, for making me remember that life goes on even after great loss." Hannah turned to look at him, struck by the raw emotion in his voice. "You're welcome, but I think you would have found your way back to joy eventually, even without my help." He shook his head. "I'm not so sure. I was drowning, Hannah. In grief, in responsibility, in the sheer impossibility of it all." His eyes, when they met hers, were dark with remembered pain. "You threw me a lifeline." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "I'm glad I was here," she said softly, "that I could help. Is that all it is? Help?" He asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because I find myself feeling things for you that go far beyond gratitude, Hannah O'Brien, her heart stuttered in her chest. Thaddeus, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted quickly. I know it's too soon, I know I'm still healing, but I wanted you to know that you've become important to me, more important than I ever expected. Hannah sat very still, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment. You've become important to me too, she admitted, the words feeling inadequate for the depth of her feelings. He reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. The touch was simple, but it sent warmth spreading up her arm and through her body. I'm not asking for promises, he said. Just possibility. Hannah looked at their joined hands, then back at his face, seeing hope there alongside lingering grief and newer, tentative feelings. Possibility, she echoed. Yes, I think we have that. His smile, then, was like the breaking of dawn after a long night, gradual but transformative. They sat together a while longer, hands linked, watching the tree and contemplating possibilities. Christmas morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and the children's excited voices waking the household at dawn. Hannah had risen early to prepare special cinnamon buns for breakfast, and the scent of them baking filled the kitchen as the children tore into their simple gifts. Thaddeus had surprised them all with his woodworking skills, crafting a dollhouse for Susie, a rocking horse for Grace, wooden soldiers for Samuel, hunting slingshots for the twins, and a beautiful writing desk for Mary. For Hannah, he'd made a sewing box with intricate inlaid patterns on the lid. It's exquisite, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. I had no idea you were so talented. My father was a carpenter before he took up ranching, Thaddeus explained, looking pleased at her reaction. He taught me the basics, the rest I figured out along the way. Hannah had gifts for everyone, as well-knitted mittens and scarves she'd worked on late into the nights, rag dolls for the girls, a handwritten book of stories for Samuel, new shirts for the twins made from fabric she'd saved from her own dresses, and a quilt for Thaddeus pieced together from scraps during stolen moments. When did you find time for all this? He asked, running his hand over the quilt's careful stitching. A woman has her secrets, she replied with a smile. The day passed in a blur of food, games, and laughter. By evening, the children were happily exhausted, playing with their new toys while Thaddeus and Hannah cleaned up after the feast they'd prepared together. This has been the best Christmas I can remember, he told her as they worked side by side at the sink. Even before Elizabeth died. There's something about the simplicity of it, the focus on family rather than things. I feel the same, Hannah admitted. In Boston, Christmas was often an elaborate affair with formal dinners and expensive gifts, but there was little warmth in it. She glanced toward the main room, where the children played in the glow of the tree. This feels real. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with visions of their wonderful day dancing in their heads, Thaddeus and Hannah stood together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold night air. Stars blazed overhead in a dazzling display, the Milky Way a ribbon of light across the velvet darkness. I have one more gift for you, Thaddeus said, turning to face her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in a handkerchief. Hannah took it, curious. Unwrapping the cloth revealed a delicate wooden carving of a rose in full bloom, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand but exquisitely detailed. It's beautiful, she whispered, turning it to admire the craftsmanship. Roses were Elizabeth's favorite, he said quietly. But I've come to associate them with you, delicate yet strong, thriving even in difficult conditions. Hannah looked up at him, touched by the symbolism. Thaddeus, let me finish, he said gently. When Elizabeth died, I thought I'd never feel love again. I was certain that part of me had died with her. His eyes held her steadily. I was wrong. My heart is healing, Hannah, and as it heals, it's making room for new feelings. For you. The confession hung in the cold air between them, more precious than any gift she'd ever received. I care for you too, she said softly. More than I should, perhaps, given my position here, he shook his head. Your position is whatever we choose to make it. I don't want you as just my children's caretaker, Hannah. I want. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I want the possibility of more when we're both ready. Hannah looked down at the wooden rose in her palm, then back at this man who'd endured so much and was still capable of such tenderness. I'd like that too, she admitted, the possibility of more. Thaddeus stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The touch was gentle, questioning. Hannah leaned into it slightly, giving permission. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. It was brief, a promise rather than a demand, but when they separated, Hannah knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. As winter settled fully over the Colorado landscape, the Sommers Ranch and its inhabitants developed new routines. The children, thriving under Hannah's care and their father's renewed engagement with their lives, grew healthier and happier. The ranch itself began to prosper as Thaddeus, no longer paralyzed by grief, made improvements and plans for expansion. Hannah and Thaddeus moved cautiously in their evolving relationship. By unspoken agreement, they kept their growing feelings largely private, sharing moments alone after the children were in bed, occasional touches as they passed in the kitchen, meaningful glances across the dinner table. The children, of course, noticed the change. Mary in particular watched them with knowing eyes and a barely suppressed smile. "Are you going to marry Hannah, Pa?" she asked bluntly one evening in late January when Hannah had stepped outside to gather more firewood. Thaddeus nearly choked on his coffee. "Mary, we're not." He collected himself. "Hannah and I are friends, good friends." The girl raised a skeptical eyebrow in a manner so reminiscent of her mother that Thaddeus felt a pang of both grief and amusement. "You look at her the way you used to look at Ma," she observed, "and she makes you smile again." Thaddeus couldn't deny either assertion. Instead, he asked gently, "Would it bother you if Hannah became more than our housekeeper? If someday, and I'm not saying it will happen, but if someday she became part of our family officially?" Mary considered this seriously. "I think Ma would want you to be happy," she said finally, "and Hannah makes all of us happy, so no, it wouldn't bother me." He reached out to stroke his daughter's hair. "You're a wise girl, Mary Sommers, too wise for your years sometimes. So you are going to marry her?" Mary exclaimed triumphantly. Thaddeus laughed. "I didn't say that. These things take time and Hannah may have other ideas entirely." But as winter melted into spring, it became increasingly clear that Hannah's ideas aligned perfectly with his own. Their quiet moments together grew longer and more frequent. Their conversations deepened, sharing histories, dreams, and fears. The initial spark of attraction developed into something more substantial: mutual respect, genuine affection, and eventually, undeniable love. By April, with the ranch coming back to life after the long winter, Thaddeus knew it was time to formalize what everyone already sensed was happening. He made arrangements to take Hannah into Alamosa on a Saturday, leaving the children with Mrs. Peterson, a neighbor who occasionally helped with childcare. "A whole day in town?" Hannah asked when he proposed the outing. "What's the occasion? Does there need to be one?" he countered with a smile. "Maybe I just want to spend some time alone with you, away from 6 pairs of curious eyes and endless chores." Hannah blushed prettily. "That would be lovely. It's been ages since I've had a proper day out." The morning of their excursion dawned clear and mild, the mountains still snow-capped but the valleys greening with new life. Hannah wore her best dress, a blue calico that complemented her eyes, and arranged her hair with extra care. When she emerged from her room, Thaddeus was waiting by the wagon, freshly shaven and wearing his good shirt. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her up to the seat. "Thank you," she replied, noting how handsome he appeared when not exhausted or worried. The months of better food, reduced stress, and increasing happiness had erased years from his face. The drive to Alamosa took just over an hour, filled with comfortable conversation and planning for the spring planting. The town had grown considerably since Hannah's arrival the previous autumn, with new businesses opening as more settlers moved into the San Luis Valley. Their first stop was the Mercantile, where Thaddeus insisted on buying Hannah a new bonnet for the coming summer. Then they visited the bookstore, selecting new readers for the older children and a volume of poetry that caught Hannah's eye. "Are you hungry?" Thaddeus asked as midday approached. "The hotel restaurant serves a decent meal, I'm told." Hannah agreed eagerly. She hadn't eaten in a proper restaurant since leaving Boston, and the prospect was exciting. The hotel dining room was modest by Eastern standards but clean and pleasant, with white tablecloths and real silver cutlery. Over roast beef and potatoes, they discussed the future, the additional cattle Thaddeus hoped to purchase, Hannah's plans to expand the vegetable garden, the possibility of sending Mary to the town school in the fall. "You've transformed our lives," Thaddeus said suddenly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I was drowning when you arrived, just going through the motions. Now I'm looking forward again, making plans." Hannah squeezed his fingers. "You've transformed my life too. I came west running from something, but I found so much more than just a safe haven." His eyes held hers intently. "What were you running from, Hannah? You've never really told me." She hesitated, then decided he deserved the whole truth. "A man named Thomas Blackwood. He was from a prominent Boston family, and I was engaged to marry him." She paused, the memories still painful. "I discovered he was unfaithful. When I confronted him, he became angry, threatening. His family had influence, and when I broke the engagement, they made sure no respectable household in Boston would hire me." Thaddeus' face darkened with anger. "He hurt you, not physically," she assured him quickly. "But he tried to ruin my reputation, my livelihood. I decided a fresh start was my only option." "And you chose the wilds of Colorado," he marveled, shaking his head. "You're a brave woman, Hannah O'Brien, or a desperate one," she replied with a small smile. "But I've never regretted my decision, especially now." After lunch, they walked through town, window shopping and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together without interruptions or responsibilities. At the jeweler's shop, Thaddeus paused. "I need to pick up something I ordered," he told Hannah. "Would you mind waiting here a moment?" Curious but patient, she waited outside, watching the town's residents go about their Saturday business. When Thaddeus emerged a few minutes later, he seemed oddly nervous, suggesting they walk to the small town park before heading home. The park was really just a grassy area with a few benches near the church, but spring flowers were beginning to bloom and the setting was peaceful. They sat side by side on a bench beneath a budding oak tree. "Hannah," Thaddeus began, turning to face her. "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately, about what I want for my children, for the ranch." He paused, taking a deep breath. "For us." Hannah's heart began to race. "And what have you concluded?" she asked softly. In answer, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've concluded that I love you," he said simply. "That my children love you, that our lives are immeasurably better with you in them, not as an employee, but as family." He opened the box to reveal a modest but lovely ring, a small pearl set in gold. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She left it to me when she died, saying I should give it to the woman who captured my heart." His eyes, filled with emotion, met hers. "I loved Elizabeth with all my soul, and part of me will always belong to her memory, but my heart has room for new love, Hannah. For you." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as he continued. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to be a mother to my children, to build a life with me on that hardscrabble ranch that's becoming a real home again, thanks to you." For a moment, Hannah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Are you certain? It's only been 8 months since you arrived," he finished for her, "and nearly a year and a half since Elizabeth died. I know it might seem soon to others, but life is short and unpredictable. I've learned that lesson the hard way." He took her hand. "I'm certain, Hannah. The question is, are you?" She looked into his face, seeing there the man she'd come to love, strong yet vulnerable, stubborn yet kind, shaped by hardship but not defeated by it. She thought of the children who had become so dear to her, of the ranch that now felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived, of the life they could build together. "Yes," she said, the word emerging as both a whisper and a promise. "Yes, I'm certain. Yes, I'll marry you, Thaddeus Sommers." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Thaddeus cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and passion and future. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Hannah laughed softly. "The children will be insufferably smug. Mary's been predicting this for months." Thaddeus chuckled. "She's her mother's daughter, too observant by half, but you're right, they'll be pleased." His expression grew more serious. "They love you, Hannah. You've healed them as much as you've healed me." "They've healed me too," she admitted. "Given me the family I always wanted but never had." They sat a while longer, making plans and dreaming dreams before reluctantly agreeing it was time to head back to the ranch. The drive home was filled with a new awareness, a sense of future unfolding before them. As they approached the ranch, they could see the children in the yard, clearly watching for their return. The moment the wagon came into view, all six erupted in excitement, running to meet them. "Did you ask her, Pa? Did she say yes?" Mary called as they pulled into the yard. Thaddeus shot Hannah an amused look. "So much for our announcement," he murmured, then called back, "Yes" to both questions. The children's cheers were deafening. As soon as the wagon stopped, they swarmed around, the younger ones clamoring to be picked up, the older ones demanding to see the ring and know all the details. "Does this mean you'll be our new ma?" Susie asked Hannah directly, her small face serious. Hannah knelt to the child's level. "If that's what you'd like, Susie, I could never replace your mother, but I would be honored to be a mother to you." Susie considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I think I'd like that. Ma's in heaven, but you're here, and we need a ma here too." The simple, childish logic brought fresh tears to Hannah's eyes. "Then that's what I'll be," she promised, gathering the little girl into a hug. That evening, after a celebratory dinner and much excited discussion about the upcoming wedding, Hannah and Thaddeus finally had a moment alone on the porch. The spring night was cool but not cold, the sky ablaze with stars. "Happy?" Thaddeus asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his solid warmth. "A year ago, I never could have imagined this life. Now I can't imagine any other." "When should we have the wedding?" he asked practically. "Before spring planting gets into full swing would be ideal," Hannah considered. 2 weeks. "That's enough time to make or alter a dress, arrange with the minister, and prepare a special meal. Nothing elaborate, just family and perhaps a few friends." He nodded. 2 weeks sounds perfect. The sooner you're officially a Sommers, the better." Hannah smiled at the thought. Hannah Sommers. It had a nice ring to it. "You know," Thaddeus mused, "when I placed that advertisement for help, I was desperate. 6 kids and no help at all, I was drowning. Then you appeared on my doorstep like some kind of miracle, saying you'd stay if I'd let you." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Best decision I ever made, letting you stay." "Best decision I ever made too," Hannah replied softly. "Coming west, answering that advertisement, saying I'll stay here if you'll let me stay." He kissed her then, under the vast Colorado sky, sealing their commitment to each other and to the family they would build together. 2 weeks later, on a perfect spring day with the mountains standing witness, Hannah O'Brien became Hannah Sommers in a simple ceremony at the Alamosa church. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk, a splurge Thaddeus had insisted upon, with wildflowers in her hair. He wore his best suit, freshly pressed, with a new string tie Mary had helped him select. The children participated in the ceremony, each with a special role. Mary held the rings, the twins acted as miniature groomsmen, Samuel carried a Bible, Susie scattered flower petals, and Grace, now toddling confidently, was held by Mrs. Peterson in the front row. "I take you, Hannah, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Thaddeus vowed, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Hannah repeated the vows, her heart so full she could barely speak the words. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thaddeus kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of love. The small reception at the ranch afterward was a joyous affair. Neighbors and townspeople who had watched the Sommers family struggle and then begin to thrive again came to offer congratulations and share in the celebration. As the afternoon waned into evening and guests began to depart, Hannah found a quiet moment with her new husband. I have news, she whispered, drawing him away from the others. Thaddeus looked at her questioningly. Good news, I hope. The best, she assured him, taking his hand and placing it gently over her still flat abdomen. I'm fairly certain we'll be welcoming a new little Sommers around Christmas. His eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Hannah felt her own heart might burst with happiness. A baby, our baby, she nodded, smiling through happy tears. Our baby, a new beginning, a new life. Thaddeus gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, Hannah Sommers, he said fiercely. You and all our children, born and unborn. And I love you, she replied, secure in his embrace, my harsh cowboy with the tender heart. As twilight settled over the ranch, the Sommers family, now 7 children and 2 parents strong, with an 8th on the way, gathered on the porch. Mary brought out her mother's old guitar, and Thaddeus, inspired by the joy of the day, began to play and sing for the first time since Elizabeth's death. Hannah sat beside him, Susie in her lap, Grace leaning against her knees, surrounded by all the children who had become hers in heart if not in blood. As the music rose into the evening air, she looked out over the ranch that was now truly her home and gave silent thanks for the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate young woman fleeing scandal in Boston to the beloved wife and mother at the center of this thriving family, Hannah's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The road hadn't been easy for any of them, but the rewards love, family, purpose, home made every hardship worthwhile. As the last notes of Thaddeus' song faded into the gathering darkness, Hannah felt the slight flutter of new life within her. Their family would continue to grow, to change, to face challenges and celebrate triumphs. But they would do it together, bound by choice and love rather than merely circumstance, and that, Hannah knew, was the greatest blessing of all. On a snowy Christmas Eve, 7 months after their wedding, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named William Thomas Sommers. As Thaddeus placed their son in her arms for the first time, Hannah looked around at the 6 older children gathered eagerly around the bed, their faces shining with excitement and love. Our family is complete now, she said softly, counting her blessings one by one. Thaddeus smiled, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Not complete, he corrected, just beginning, and he was right. The harsh cowboy who once had 6 kids and no help at all now had 7 children and a wife who had promised to stay. Their story of loss and renewal, of second chances and chosen family, of love blooming in the most unexpected places, was just beginning. As the snow fell softly outside their warm home, the Sommers family gathered together in perfect contentment, their future stretching before them like the vast Colorado sky, boundless with possibility and bright with promise.